The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to John.
Glory to you, Lord.
When Judas had left them, Jesus said, "Now is the Son of Man glorified, and God is glorified in him. If God is glorified in him, God will also glorify him in himself, and God will glorify him at once. My children, I will be with you only a little while longer. I give you a new commandment: love one another. As I have loved you, so you also should love one another. This is how we all will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another." The Gospel of the Lord.
In this Gospel reading, Judas just leaves in the Last Supper. And Jesus reminds them, hey, love one another. To love one another. So, I give you a new commandment: love one another. As I have loved you, so you also should love one another. So how does Jesus love us? Well, he died on the cross for us. He sacrificed himself for us. That's how he loved us. Now that's what we're supposed to do for each other. To sacrifice ourselves for the good of each other. And you think about that, man, that's really hard to do. I mean, that's hard enough to do with somebody you love. To sacrifice, to give your life for the good of another. Let alone somebody who may be making things hard for you. You know, that's tough. You think about what Jesus did on the cross for us. Before Jesus died on the cross for us, humanity made itself enemies of God by saying no to God. We were at odds with God. We were estranged from God. But God came down and he died for us. And so now, because of his sacrifice, we become friends. But before that, we were not friends of God. You see, Jesus actually did it. He actually died on the cross for us, so it's not some sort of thing that he expects us to do. He actually did it, so he's not expecting us to do something he didn't do. So we need to love each other with that sacrificial love. And also, when you look also here in the book of Revelation, and this is what should give us consolation. He says, "Behold, God's dwelling is with the human race. He will dwell with them, and they will be his people. And God himself will always be with them as their God." What does it mean to be with us as our God? You think about this. I mean, just really challenge yourself. What does it mean from God's perspective that he would be with us as our God? So a lot of times we think of the God of the lightning bolt, going to hit us. Well, as we read on, this is what defines, from God's perspective, this is what he wants to do for us. He will wipe every tear from their eyes, and there shall be no more death or mourning or wailing or pain, for the old order has passed away. But why has the old order passed away? Because we love one another. Because we're willing to make that sacrifice. Because he initiated that sacrifice. So what does that mean about our sacrifice? What does that mean about our sufferings? You think about the sufferings of Jesus Christ. What did the sufferings of Jesus Christ do? It brought about our redemption. It won grace for us. So with the suffering of Jesus comes grace. When you look here a little bit earlier in the book of Revelation, I saw I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride, adorned for a husband. Jerusalem, a bride. That should sound familiar. What else is the bride? The church. So the new Jerusalem is the church. It's not just something out there. You are the bride of Christ. You are part of that beautiful bride coming down. You are part of that. Adorned for a husband. But also the bride of Christ is the body of Christ, because the two has become one flesh. See, this is all the symbolism putting things together, and we'll put this into practice. The bride of Christ has been made one flesh with Jesus. You are part of the flesh of Christ. And so when we think about this, I always think about 2,000 years ago, when we look at the first reading, Paul and Barnabas can tell people, you remember that Jesus that you crucified? Remember that day when you were there and you saw God on the cross? And see, when they were talking to those people, they could say, hey, yeah, I remember that. I was there. I saw the sacrifice that Jesus made for me. And they can get it. They get it that Jesus Christ crucified, that suffering, I physically saw, that historical thing, was God's proof of his love for us. I want that. You see, they saw the sacrifice and they could understand. The difficulty today is that where do we see the sacrifice? I mean, we can see grace in the sunshine and the flowers that God made. Everything we have is God's gift to us. Our family, our friends, all our loved ones. That's great. That's God's gift to us. But where do we see the sacrifice? I mean, we could say we see it in the Eucharist because that is Jesus Christ crucified. But it's veiled. I mean, we don't see somebody suffering. What we physically see is a piece of bread, even though that is Jesus Christ. So where are people in the world today going to see the sacrifice? You are the body of Christ. See, what the people need to see today, and all those out in the world, they need to see your suffering and the love of God in one. And when they understand that, when they see your suffering, then they can understand there is a God. God is a God of love. He wants us all to be one. And so now our sufferings are united to his. Our sufferings, like that of Jesus, brings grace. Because we are called to be an alter Christus, another Christ for others, a source of life and consolation and of love. That's what we're called to be. So now, what does that mean? Okay, we know what that means with Jesus' sufferings. Jesus' suffering on the cross brought us grace. What does that mean about our sufferings? What about every time we feel pain or suffering? And this could be any kind of pain. It could be physical pain. Maybe it could be a physical handicap too. It could be an emotional pain or suffering, a loss of a person, a loved one in your life, or depression. It could be concern for somebody or yourself. It could be spiritual suffering, dryness of the spiritual life, doubts of faith. All these things are sufferings that we can offer and unite ourselves to God, and then now these sufferings can be a means of grace for yourself or for others. Maybe it's something that you can't do anymore, right? You want to do it, but you can't do it anymore. Maybe it's for some people, I can't do anything anymore. You know, you get old and your body doesn't do what it used to do. Kind of feel useless. Well, you know, you're not a human doing, you're a human being. Your value is not in your doing, your value is in your being. So it's a matter of sacrificing your will. Sacrificing your will for the good of others. That's a suffering. Because your will makes you who you are. It's saying, thy will be done, not my will be done. And so that's a real challenge. That's the innermost part of yourself that you can sacrifice to God. And God would be pleased with that sacrifice. Even if it's forced upon you. You know, your physical ailments. And so now you become a means of grace for others. Even if you're no longer useful. Right? God would shower many graces upon you and upon your loved ones if you open up that door. Unlock the treasury of graces in your life through suffering. See, suffering is no longer something we have to run away from. Like in the fall of Adam and Eve. Now people suffer because of the fall of Adam and Eve. And the devil used that as a means by which to control people. Via negativa, right? Negative reinforcement, right? Psychology. Negative reinforcement. You suffer, you don't want to do that anymore, right? Sometimes people will say, I want to go and pray. They start with gusto and they want to pray, and then all of a sudden, negative feedback happens. Something bad happens, like, maybe dryness of life. Maybe you're getting antsy. Maybe you're kind of like, this is hard to do. The devil loves to do that. Distractions. Loves to give us distractions so that you will give up. But now, through this suffering of distractions, you persevere through them, pray through them, you bring grace, and now you conquer the suffering. So you don't conquer suffering by running away from it and retreating. Right? Most of the world likes to say you must avoid suffering at all costs. They view suffering as an evil, and by its nature it is an evil. But through the grace of the cross, by the grace of the resurrection, we conquer suffering by going through it. And because we go through it, we get the grace we need. Right? If you're retreating, you've admitted you lost. But if you accept that suffering, embrace that suffering, it becomes spiritual gold. Because as the suffering of Jesus Christ won for us eternal salvation, our suffering can bring grace to souls in need. That's the spiritual gold. So it doesn't have to be an evil. You will suffer. Suffer happens. It's a part of life. There's no way you can avoid it. It will happen. But now, because we can be conquerors of suffering, the devil no longer has to control our life. But we can be truly free and not have to allow the fear of suffering to keep us from being the people we want to be. It's a different way of looking at freedom through suffering. It helps us to grow in wisdom and grace. And now when we do this, we can offer up these sufferings for those we love. For our children, our parents, our grandparents, or maybe even people we don't even know. One of the things I like to do is just say, Jesus, I offer this to whoever you want to give that to. You know who needs this grace the most. You give it to them, and I don't want to know. I don't want to know who it is. I'll find out on my day of my death. And then when the day you die, you'll have somebody welcoming you. How's that? Not bad, huh? I think that's a pretty good deal. So that's the great grace we have in suffering, to take something so evil and make it into something so good. To discover how Jesus can make all things new.